That'll get us a copyright strike. Don't put that in there. The Division 3 basketball preseason is heating up. We're heating up here on the D3 Datacast, having gone to weekly shows a couple weeks back. I'm going to take that all the way through crowning a champion, Matt. I'm always excited for a new season, but this episode we have today, we've made a mainstay of our preseason content over the last couple years, really since we launched the show. And this one in particular really gets me going. We're going to talk about the top 50 games as we decided them to be for the month of November. So just that first calendar month of the season, we've got 50 games to talk about that really any Division 3 basketball fan should look at with some sort of intrigue, some sort of interest. I think that will really shape the rest of the season.
Yeah, we've considered ourselves in season for a few weeks now, but this is, like you said, the episode where it really feels real. We're talking about actual games, these best non-conference games that are going to be huge for all these programs who they're trying to get the best NPI possible, right? Get those at-large chances. These are the games that Division 3 fans have been waiting for as the tournament or as the season starts, and we get a bunch of these great non-conference games. Zach, we're trying to highlight the 50 best games. Let us know, though, in the comment below if we missed a game or just what your favorite game for your favorite school is going to be. Like, what big game are you looking forward to the most? There's over 400 teams in Division 3. We're just talking about 50 games here in November, so there's probably lots other great games that we're not talking about, but just this gets me so excited for November basketball, Zach. Division 3 is right around the corner. It's going to happen, like, next week.
And there's even going to be some great games in November that technically we don't know about yet because they
Yeah.
might be dependent on uh, tournament results on day one. That we're going to get some good ones. It just depends on who the winners, who the losers are. We don't know exactly what those are going to be. So that kind of thing has been excluded from our list here. Let's jump into it because we've got 50 games to get through. We're going to start off here. Hope at Anderson on opening night. Matt, we just came off our previous episode doing our conference champion draft. Think back a year ago to when we did that episode. None of us really seemed to know what to make of Anderson. And this will be a rematch of an opening night game from a year ago, and one that Anderson got a win in Holland. And I think it was really kind of signaled that, okay, yeah, Anderson is going to be good once again, even though coming into the season we maybe didn't know what to make of them.
Yeah, and they continued that all the way through the season. I think they won 20 games last year. They were a kind of a bubble team who fell off toward the end of the season, maybe just a win or two away. It's wins like this, though, that put them in that position. So what they're going to do this year, right? You want to try to come back. Can you repeat that? Can you get another win? And can you build on that as they try to reach the tournament this year?
Same night, November 7th, Calvin travels to Ohio to take on Denison. It's an opening night meeting of the defending MIAA champ against the defending NCAC champ.
Yeah, and those conference championship type games, it's fun to see them the next year, kind of which league stacks up each other. Old Region 7, we don't really talk about those regions quite as much as we used to, but this is a big one in that respect. I think Calvin's a program that wants to not only get into the tournament consistently, but try to get back in a position to host first round games in the tournament. It's been a long time since they've done that. But it's games like this for not just Calvin, but everyone on the list that really sets you up for those types of positions. You have to win these big non-conference games if you want to then be at home come March.
Another big non-conference game as UW La Crosse heads east. They'll play Hampton-Sydney as part of the Town Bank tip-off tournament at Virginia Wesleyan. And Matt, maybe we can talk about these two in pair because the other game in that tip-off tournament is worth talking about. Keene State will take on Virginia Wesleyan, and this is one of those cases, as we talked about at the beginning. It doesn't matter who wins or loses on the opening night. There's going to be two more great games the
Yeah.
next night. Just don't know what that combination will be.
Yeah, hate to see it, but someone's going to come out of this weekend 0-2. I think you and I saw
Yeah.
that up close in person at a great Illinois Wesleyan Sigma Invitational. Unfortunately, it was Calvin that came out 0-2. Someone's going to be a really good team and be 0-2 in this tournament weekend. For me, UW La Crosse and Virginia Wesleyan are the two teams that are maybe featuring more prominently in my top 25 ballot. But we know Hampton City and Keene State have been great programs as well. They're teams that if people aren't voting in the top 25, they're probably on their watch list. I think I have three of these four teams in my top 25. Just going to be a really great tournament weekend there, opening weekend. Just love to see this kind of thing.
Big opportunity for someone to make a 2-0 statement, not
Oh,
just
right. I mean, of
the
course.
unfortunate. Yeah. All right, going on to slide two. Matt, we're still on this opening weekend. It's going to be a big opening weekend. We've got Swarthmore at Albertus Magnus. Shane Leffler takes over for Landry Kosmalski as the head coach there at Swarthmore. And Albertus Magnus has been in that, increasingly solid mix at the top of the GNAC.
Yeah, you never know how it's going to turn out. But I think early season for me, people might be sick of me talking about how interested I am, at least at the top of the GNAC. I think traditionally that's been a league without a lot of depth and sometimes without quality at the top. Although, Albertus here or St. Joseph or St. Joseph's Maine have had good seasons. But I think there's a chance that there's two like top 25 caliber teams and then two other teams that are kind of knocking on the door of being really, really good here. Albertus is one of them. So up against Swarthmore, a program that's been in the Final Four just a few years back, has a coaching turnover here. But this is a great, great game, but also a great game for Albertus and the GNAC to kind of say, hey, where are we going to be in the pecking order this year? I don't think they're going to be just a bottom feeder conference anymore, or at least not this year.
Brandeis and Babson gives a really interesting UAA versus NUMAC matchup. Matt, we got three ranked teams in the UAA, and then I think some question marks. Brandeis is one of those teams that I think a lot of people looked at as, maybe they would be a number four. Could they get into the top 25 mix? And even if you're a tier two UAA team, you're a really good team. Babson in the NUMAC, that's another conference that the overall NUMAC picture is often lacks clarity and can really change from week to week. So this will be an interesting matchup between a UAA and a NUMAC school.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. Brandeis has been a team that has felt like they've been able to beat really good teams in the UAA, but that's such a gauntlet. Doing that consistently and getting into that number four kind of spot where you're now like a tournament viable team has been difficult for them. A game like this against Babson, one of those kind of top three or four teams in a NUMAC conference that always has a really strong top three or four as well. It's going to be another old school like Region 2 matchup game, but it's a great to see where do these teams maybe fall in the pecking order in their part of the country, and then also are they going to make noise nationally as well.
Here's one November 8th, Matt. I think we can give the category or like the label of maybe a sneaky good matchup or a sneaky interesting game to pay attention to. And that's UW Stevens Point traveling to Milwaukee to take on MSOE.
Yeah, I was kind of surprised. I think Ryan Scott right away posted his ballot, had MSOE. I wasn't really expecting that. They were, for me, a little bit off of my board, but I think that's an interesting pick. I think they had some good results, some good wins last year in the Northern Athletics Conference. Northern Athletics Conference is going to have a big change at the top as Wisconsin Lutheran graduated like their entire starting lineup, maybe plus some, I think. So there's an opportunity here. UW Stevens Point has been a program that's been trying to break back into the very upper echelon of a strong WIAC conference. So again, this is a game for both these teams. Can they put an early stamp on the season of having a quality for them in-state win, but a quality win maybe nonetheless?
I think as we looked at that Wisconsin Lutheran team a year ago, any stumble in NACC play would have been a surprise. Matt, one of those came as a
Yeah.
loss to MSOE last February, as WLC was then ranked number 7 in the country. So maybe an interesting, sign that that game may have said maybe more about MSOE and the direction that program is heading than, as a true like negative against Wisconsin Lutheran. UW Oshkosh and St. John's next up on our list. St. John's is just one of those programs you can count on to a certain degree every year, but they face a lot of roster turnover. UW Oshkosh, another one of those teams you always think will be in the mix in the WIAC, but they've seems to have really been hurt by the injury bug the last couple of years. Interesting matchup, maybe just to kind of see where these programs are for this season.
Yeah, it seems like every time UW Oshkosh would get going, the last maybe 2 seasons now, someone would go down. They'd have to kind of change the look of their lineup. They were also a team. I think they were pretty good last year. We know they beat Calvin twice, but then I think they were the last WIAC team maybe to get an in-league win. It took them a while to get going in the WIAC. Their team, though, I think if things can start rolling right, be healthy for them, I think they can make noise in the WIAC. After UW Lacrosse, for me, I think there's some unknowns. Maybe UW Oshkosh could get in that mix, maybe back in the top 2 or 3 in the league. There's a lot of teams vying for that position, so a lot easier said than done, but I think they're one of those teams. And you're right, St. John's, I just know almost absolutely nothing about them other than they're a good program year after year. So you want to give the program a lot of credit. But again, top 6, 7, 8, 6 or 7 of their 8 guys last year, I think, were seniors or even fifth years last year. So I think they're going to have a lot to replace, have confidence that they're going to be able to bring in reasonably good players to replace that. But who that exactly is, I don't think we quite know yet.
We got three more here just to finish off opening weekend. Let's talk GNAC again, Matt. I know you're itching to talk GNAC. LaSalle was a sneaky team in the GNAC, maybe didn't get credit that they deserved. They finished in a second place tie with St. Joseph's, Connecticut. They've got a meeting here opening weekend with WPI.
Yeah, and we know WPI, they're always in the mix in the NUMAC. I think they just released the NUMAC coaches poll. I think they were the top vote getter in the NUMAC, kind of unsurprisingly. But LaSalle here's an opportunity to showcase, okay, how good are you, and maybe how good is the top of your league now. Game you expect WPI to win, and maybe they just do, and it's fine. But LaSalle's a program that I think has had some steady rise over the last several seasons. You said 12-2 in league last year. I think that's pretty good. There were some good teams at the top of the GNAC even last year. To only lose 2 games was quite strong. I think they won 18 games overall. This is one of those 4 teams kind of at the top of the GNAC. I think has some positive trajectory. I'm really interested to see if that continues into the 2025-26 season.
St. Joseph's went 13-1 to win the regular season GNAC title. Interesting measuring stick here, game Matt, for a GNAC contender against, we'll say, UAA unknown. Of course, lots of roster turnover there with NYU. Also a new head coach with Waleed Fareed coming over from Ithaca. A lot of unknowns. It's going to be, just interesting to see, what is NYU this year.
Yeah, third GNAC game I think we've already been talking about. But St. Joseph's Maine was really good, maybe not completely on everyone's radar last year, but had a really good season. I think they bring a good amount back from that team. And then NYU is just going to be one of the great unknowns coming into this year. Are they going to be, if they ended up a top 10 or 15 team, I would in some ways not be surprised, but it's another team. It's new coach, it's entirely new roster, new players, don't know what it is. I think it's a great opportunity for both of these teams to put stamps on the season. St. Joseph's Maine saying, hey, boom, we can beat a program like NYU. We are here to stay. Or NYU saying, not so fast, my friend. Don't count us out. We were in the national championship game last year. We still have a lot of good players here in our program. And new Coach Fareed's going to maybe just keep them rolling. Hard to say. Games like this are huge for that.
Finally, we've reached just the end of opening weekend. One more to talk about here. Nebraska Wesleyan travels to Platteville, take on UW Platteville.
Yeah, I mean, really good Region 9 game if we want to talk old school regions once again. Nebraska Wesleyan in the ARC, or ARC if you want to call them. Go ahead and call them the ARC if you would like to. I'm personally A-okay with that. Nebraska Wesleyan, no stranger to being on top there. I think they're going to be once again in the mix. UW Platteville, in a world now post Logan Pearson, how good are they going to be? I think quite good. I think if you're just writing them off because they lose one of the best players in Division III, I think you're going to be mistaken. That's just a great program. They have a lot of other dudes in the team that weren't just seniors last year, so I think that's going to be a great team. Game I might expect Platteville to win, but I think Nebraska Wesleyan could be sneaky good as well this next year.
Let's move into the first full week of the season, starting November 11th. Franklin and Marshall will take on Marymount.
Yeah, Franklin and Marshall, they were the Centennial champions a season ago. They reload a little bit, but I think not too much. I think they're bringing a kind of an averagey amount of talent back to Franklin and Marshall there. Marymount's always a sneaky, pesky team in the AEC. We know the AEC as a conference is maybe a tier or two below the Centennial, but Marymount's a pretty good team, and they bring a pretty good amount of their production back from what I can tell. So I think this is going to be an interesting game. Franklin and Marshall is a team that could be right in the mix again in the Centennial, which makes them quite good. Again, Marymount, though, they can sneak up on just about anyone.
Also, November 11th, Johns Hopkins will take on York. A York team coming off a second round appearance in last year's tournament, having knocked off John Carroll in the opening round. Another one facing a coaching change. Matt Hunter departed to Gettysburg following that opening that was created when B.J. Dunn moved on to MIT. Jared Wagner is promoted, so some stability there, promoting the assistant who has been around and coming off a good season. Interesting to see how the Spartans look this season.
Yeah, and they've had a good run of success, so kind of maybe a deserved coaching opportunity there in the change, but we're going to have to see what does that make of York this year. For me, Johns Hopkins was a team last year that was kind of Jekyll and Hyde at times. You'd watch them one game and they would just look great. They'd look like they're a top 10 team for sure. They can beat anyone. And then you'd maybe check a score the next game and just be like, how did they get kind of run over by that team? There's going to have some changeover there for Johns Hopkins. Ryan Kane, though, what is this? Is it his third year with the program? Am I trying to remember correctly? So I think he'll have maybe things rolling. Not that he had to like completely change things over there, but I looking for Johns Hopkins to take some stability. They were right in the mix in the Centennial last year, but at times they looked head and shoulders above everyone else. At times they looked like they could lose to anyone. So what's Johns Hopkins going to be this year? That's what we're going to be waiting to find out.
Randolph Macon and Christopher Newport. This is just an auto include in this kind of list every year. I believe this game always falls in November, so it makes an easy one for putting together a list like this. They'll meet November 12th this season.
Yeah, when was the last time either of these two teams were bad, right? And bad for these two teams might be, well, they weren't in the top 15 this year or something like that. So it's been a long time. We know Christopher Newport playing in the Coast to Coast Conference needs games, and they need good games. So they're always willing to play a top team like Randolph Macon. I'm glad these two teams are willing to play each other. It's kind of a fun non-conference rivalry now. It's like one of these games you just circle, as you said, right away when the schedules get released. Like, man, that's one of those great games that we'll see in Virginia, like the first or second weekend of the season. Great to see that these two teams are playing, and excited for what they both have in store.
All right, is this the fourth GNAC team we've mentioned, Matt? St. Joseph, Connecticut will have a game at Clark on November 12th. We got kind of a team you figure to be in the mix in the top of the GNAC, with one you figure to be in the mix at the top of the NUMAC. Little Northeast bragging rights here.
Yeah, and I was interested in St. Joseph, Connecticut coming into the season, but almost as like a sneaky, like last kind of team in or out of my top 25 ballot. I've been surprised that they had as much love as they've gotten this season. They were the team in the top 25 from the GNAC, and St. Joseph's Maine was outside. I had those two flipped. I thought St. Joseph's Maine was maybe the team that had a little bit more solid claim to the top 25 after what they did this year. But another great GNAC versus NUMAC game. Clark's a team that's really looking to kind of be in that top pairing maybe in the NUMAC, maybe trying to win that league. They won the Pool A, I believe, last year out of the NUMAC. So they were in the tournament. St. Joseph, Connecticut, just a couple of years ago, was one of those top teams nationally. Would be nice if they can kind of continue that program strength, that program momentum. That's a men's basketball program that's not even that old, and yet they've already had some good success. So just really fun matchup. Really good to see both of these teams. Can they get kind of another strong win or an early strong win onto their resume?
Tufts will play at Babson. Matt, we're talking November 14th here. This is actually the opener for Tufts.
Yeah, the NESCAC likes to play by their own rules, which means they do not allow themselves. They choose not to play the first weekend of the season. They wait to the second weekend. So will be a later start for the NESCAC as always. I think even their practices are delayed. They choose to do that to themselves. Let's be clear. But this will be a good game. See if Tufts can get rolling right away against Babson. We've already mentioned some strong games that Babson has. They're right in the mix in the NUMAC as well. So that this is going to be a lot of hype for this Tufts program. A lot of people have them in the number 2, number 3, number 4 spot in the country. That's up where I have them. So expecting a lot of things out of Tufts. So to come right out of the gate and play a team like Babson, a program like Babson, that's going to be a big deal.
Anytime you hear something about the NESCAC not being allowed to do something, remind yourself that it's because they choose
They
not to allow
choose not to
themselves.
do it. Yes.
All right, Matt, let's talk about Maryville. They're pulling the SICMA Invitational, Great Lakes Invitational double this year. The game here to talk about, Maryville will play UW Oshkosh in the first round of the SICMA Invitational.
Yeah, fantastic. A lineup again at the SICMA Invitational. Fantastic matchup here. I think Maryville's excited about what they have. I think the voters are excited about what Maryville has this year in the top 20, I believe. They're in the top 25 for sure. Number 21 is where they checked in. UW Oshkosh was that program you mentioned, trying to get back rolling, getting pieces together after some injuries. That's a strong program. This is going to be a good game, even though UW Oshkosh is outside the top 25 and not really getting that consideration right now, or at least much of that consideration right now. I think, did they get a vote? Yes, they did get some votes. They got 11 points. So both teams getting points. Maryville in the poll. Really good matchup here. Maryville's given themselves a difficult non-conference schedule, though. So I think they're going to be great. But if they're like a step behind great, then they could be gathering up maybe more losses than they want to. So games like this, you don't want to call them must wins. It's not a must win, but really nice to have for Maryville, as then they will travel to the Great Lakes Invitational later and play even more tough games.
November 15, we'll have an old Capital Athletic Conference rivalry. Christopher Newport will travel to DC to play Catholic.
Yeah, two teams that are kind of in the top half-ish of my top 25 ballot. I think I'm a little bit more confident in Christopher Newport than Catholic, but an interesting matchup to see what does Catholic bring back? What are they able to bring into the program? How do they stack up against kind of a good national program like Christopher Newport? But Catholic's no stranger to being in that national mix. They've been there the last several years. I kind of expect them to keep rolling. But again, games like this, that they're fun to see, and either team could then, kind of stake their claim to the season with a big win like this.
Stockton will play Gettysburg November 15th. Matt, you can say two things that the NJAC is always really competitive at the top, and Stockton always seems to be in the mix there. Gettysburg, we mentioned kind of the coaching dominoes that fell, and new coach there with Matt Hunter coming over from York as BJ Dunn departs for MIT. Just kind of an interesting regional game here.
Yeah, and you're right. Stockton has always been in the mix in the NJAC, who's always kind of been a type of conference that can get a bunch of teams into the tournament. One of the reasons they've been able to get a bunch of teams in the tournament is those NJAC conference teams can win a bunch of non-conference games. This is not an easy non-conference game here for Stockton. It's against a good program in Gettysburg that got into the program or got into the tournament last year. Yes, a coaching change, but going to be a difficult matchup. It's one of these like great NPI games that not only do the teams want, but the conference wants to get, so that way you can kind of buoy your conference's NPI into your conference season, and then to kind of stack your league up better than the other leagues when it comes down to the NPI rankings.
More coaching dominoes that we've kind of already mentioned here, Matt. In this one, Ithaca takes on Hamilton. We talked about Waleed Fareed taking the NYU job from Ithaca. That job was filled by Mike McSloy, moving from Drew to Ithaca. So another one that's going to be under new direction there. And Hamilton, let's just say, has a Hank Morgan size
Yeah.
hole to fill.
Yeah, and that's the big name. We know Hamilton was great last year. Did kind of have an early tournament exit though, but man, tough to replace a Hank Morgan. We saw him with the We Are D3 team this summer, so he's not going to be with Hamilton again. So, how good are they going to be? Are they going to be able to be kind of that 20-win NESCAC next team up kind of a level, or is Ithaca going to be able to win a game like this? Ithaca was a tournament team as well last year after winning the Liberty League tournament. They had a convincing NCAA tournament win as well. So Ithaca was a good program, but like you said, both these programs have unknowns coming into the year. So it's maybe tough to know exactly what you can take out of a game like this. But again, the winner's going to be set up a lot better than the loser as far as going forward and being confident in what they have going forward.
Didn't plan it this way, Matt, but you mentioned that tournament exit by Hamilton a year ago, and look who's next up here: Western New England, who
Yep.
uh, who they were the ones that knocked out Hamilton in a really well played game by Western New England there. Next game to talk about: Western New England takes on Keene State.
Yeah, and the CNE, the old Commonwealth Coast Conference, seems to do this as much as anyone, where a team gets in, whoever kind of makes it through the league gets in as maybe an unheralded program, and then goes and makes a deep run. We've seen Nichols do it in the past. We saw
Yep.
Western New England get to the Sweet 16 this year. So I don't know what it is about it. It's good teams. They don't always seem to play up to that level all season long, but then they're ready to go once the national tournament starts. That was Western New England last year. I think they do have to replace a bunch of talent that they lost. I think they have a good chunk that they have to replace, but it was a good program. It's a good team to watch this year. And playing a team like Keene State, who's been kind of a Northeast corridor blue blood for a long time now, that's a good measuring stick game.
Hood will take on Ramapo at McDaniel. Matt, I guess that's called an event there called the Battle of DC and Maryland. But anyway, Hood and Ramapo.
Yeah, Ramapo made the tournament last year. Hood's season was a little bit of a step back, but also that step back season included a win against Randolph-Macon, so it was still a good program, even though their overall record wasn't as good as maybe it had been the last year or two before that. Really interesting then to see what these two teams have in store for this year. Ramapo, another one of those great NJAC teams. We talked about Stockton already. Ramapo's been kind of in that mix as well for several years now. Can Hood in the Middle Atlantic type region that you just described, can they stay in the mix, or is their program destined to fall back a little bit? I think they've been good. How good, we don't quite know yet.
And then the matchup we've all been waiting for: Yeshiva finally gets to take on Randolph-Macon.
Yeah, this was it a Sweet 16 game that was about to happen during the COVID shutdown? Am I describing that correctly, Zach? It looks like I am.
Yes, it was a highly anticipated matchup that never took place because of COVID.
So
Yeah.
this was like the Ryan Terrell Yeshiva teams against the Buzz Anthony Randolph Macon teams that never quite got to happen. We're going to get it this year, different rosters for both sides, but we're going to get the game this year. Randolph Macon is highly ranked. Yeshiva was getting poll points as well, so a very interesting game. Yeshiva's wait and see for me personally. And with the schedule that they've put together, they could be a pretty good team and also be like 1-8. So it's really hard to say exactly how good. But a game like Randolph Macon, I'm going to get the popcorn. I'm going to watch the game. I'm going to tune in to that broadcast and try to watch it, Zach. Try to.
Yes, yes, not a Max Live game, but a Flow Sports game.
We'll try to
So
watch it. We'll see how that goes.
th there's that. Let's talk about the Midway Classic at the University of Chicago. First, we're going to talk about two teams not the University of Chicago. Starting with Trinity, Texas against Emory. Matt, another one of those teams with a coaching change. Jimmy Smith departs for Stephen F. Austin, I believe it was at the Division I level. Taking over there is Marwan El Rakabawi, as he was the head coach at Shriner, now at Trinity. And Matt, Shriner was one of those kind of
Yeah.
pesky teams that I feel like if they were exactly as they were, but in a different part of the country, I think they would have gotten talked about a little bit more or thought about maybe in a different way. Made a Cinderella run through the SCAC a couple years ago, um, and had a pretty nice season last year. I think maybe one of those Texas teams that didn't get enough
Yeah.
pub, just because of their location.
I definitely knew them as one of those teams that would throw a wrench into my bracketology because they
Yeah.
wouldn't be one of the top seeds in the SCAC, but then they would go and win the conference, and then all of a sudden your Texas geography is all whacked out. Coach Rock takes over at Trinity, but we also have to see Trinity without Christian Green. Emory is about as big of a measuring stick as they get. They were great last year. I think they return a bunch of players. I think they're going to be great this year. Maybe like an early Final Four type favorite type of great. So right away we get to see, does Trinity match up with that level? It's tough to do, right? Or are they going to be a step behind? There's plenty of room to be a step behind Emory, I think, and still be a great team. So we're going to have to find out exactly where does Trinity land.
And we'll find out a lot about where Trinity lands because the next day in that Midway Classic there, they get the host, University of Chicago. Um, I believe UC Santa Cruz is the other team there, so that will be who Chicago will be coming off playing the night before.
Yeah, Trinity might be kicking themselves after this game too, because there's a chance that Emory and U Chicago are both like top 10 teams and they're both great. So again, another opportunity for Trinity to be a good team, but maybe come out of this weekend 0-2 they'd love to probably get a win here. But I'm seeing two UAA teams in Emory and Chicago that are just great. Chicago in particular has those two transfers, Shane Regan from Wesleyan and Nick Roper from Illinois Wesleyan, that really could add a different dynamic at the top. Of course, it's not just everyone else back for Chicago. They lose Thomas Kurowski, who was a big part of their team last year. So interesting for every team to see what is this iteration going to be. I think Chicago is one of those teams, like it could be a great iteration this year. We'll have to find out.
That first full week wraps up for us here on this list with Tufts taking on Endicott. Matt, Endicott maybe one of those CNE teams with an opportunity to make an early season statement as opposed to some of those late season runs that you talked about earlier.
We've talked about on previous episodes that I've made an effort to kind of try to value what each team has returning as far as returning production. Endicott is one of those teams that scores highly for me in this regard. They've been a team that has maybe had the last like 3 years trajectory of being like a maybe number 150-ish team and then maybe like a number 85-ish team. And now this year, who knows? Can they be like a top 50, maybe closing in on a top 25 top team? I don't know. Tufts is a huge measuring stick, but I'm just really interested to see what does Endicott have. Can a team like Tufts fulfill the preseason hype? This is a great game. If Tufts isn't ready for it, Endicott could absolutely come up and bite them. So just really fascinating game here. November 16, what is that, like the second weekend of the season? Just about. So really good one here.
Moving on to the second full week of the season, we've got St. Joseph's of Maine taking on Clark. Matt, we're going to really know how Clark stacks up against the top of the GNAC.
Yeah, it's a game for both teams. I feel like it's almost a must win. There's probably no such thing as a must win in November, but both teams really feel like they have to have it. St. Joseph's, we maybe have talked about there's some good games at the top of the GNAC this year, but there's not a lot of depth there. So I think St. Joseph's as a program, they've scheduled this way. It seems like we need to go and find quality outside of our conference. Clark is another game that gives them some quality here. But for Clark, it's maybe almost the opposite approach. We have a lot of quality in our conference when we play teams like Babson and teams like WPI and others that can beat us. We need to get some wins here. So we can't afford too many more losses. Game like St. Joseph's Maine, that's a tough game. We need to go and get that win. So I feel like maybe for different reasons, but both of these teams feel like we need to get some wins here. But it's really interesting. I think across the board, we're seeing like the top of the NUMAC played the top of the GNAC, and that's going to be really, really fascinating to see how well do they stack up with one another. I think it's going to be a bunch of really good games, is what I think.
Our next game here, I'm going to consider very similar to the game we talked about earlier with Stevens Point taking on MSOE. That's Augustana playing Hamlin on November 18. Matt, I know Hamlin's one of those maybe sneaky teams that you've got your eye on coming into the season.
Yeah, I'm really interested in what's going to happen at the top of the MIAC. We've talked about St. John's losing a ton. Gustavus Adolphus was the other team at the top last year. I think they lose a ton as well. If I'm correct there. So is it a team like Hamlin? Can they step in and fill that role? Can they jump from like third, fourth to like top two in that conference? I'm not sure, but I think this is an opportunity for them against Augustana, who maybe has a chance to be, top half for sure of the CCIW, maybe a third, fourth team, maybe sneak into that second spot if they have a really good season in the CCIW. Really fascinating matchup for both these teams. And you're right, I'm sneaky interested in Hamlin's position in the MIAC race this year.
TCNJ against DeSales, Matt. I feel like these are just two programs that are kind of in the mix in their conferences every year. TCNJ, one of those teams going through a coaching change with Matt Goldsmith moving on to Middlebury to take over the program following Jeff Brown's retirement there. Evan Elberg takes over for the Lions.
Yeah, to me, DeSales is a program that, as much as almost anyone is going to be up and around 20 wins, that wasn't the case for them last year. So they're looking to maybe bounce back into that range. That has been the case for TCNJ. They've been a 20-win season for a couple years now, and can they continue that right with a new coach, a new program going forward? Can they keep rolling that direction in this kind of old school Region 4 matchup? Really interesting to see what can each program bring to the table this season.
All right, no one involved in this game probably wants to call it the Nick Roper Bowl, but I'm going to call it the Nick Roper Bowl, Matt. University of Chicago travels to Illinois Wesleyan for a big one on November 19, which I believe is also our friend Bob Quillman's birthday.
That'll be a big game. We know what will make him happy on that day would be a Titans victory. But yeah, the Nick Roper dynamic is just going to be really interesting. He was a great 4-year player for Illinois Wesleyan, although I think one of those was an injury year, which is why he has a 5th year available. Is a grad transfer at U Chicago, one of 2 big transfers that they're bringing in what looks like a potential top maybe 10 team for Chicago. But Illinois Wesleyan, they were a senior-laden team last year, graduated a ton, but I think I'm led to believe they're bringing in some guys. I think that they're always a good program. When you talk about program momentum, with what Ron Rose does year in and year out, that's always, you never look silly by saying Illinois Wesleyan is going to be in the mix. I think like every year except for one, they've been in the top 25 or something like that. Maybe not exactly correct, but it feels like it at least. But this game is going to be fantastic. It's going to let us know in kind of it's like an old Region 8 RRO game. I know I've been talking about that or not. Those RROs don't exist, and for good reason a lot of the time. But these are the games that you miss talking about a little bit more. Was like, man, the pecking order position could be really, really massive for both that head-to-head and RRO dynamic. I like how NPI sorts it out anyway, but so now we can just sit back and watch this as a fun game and not know that it's going to have like outsized impact. It's really important, but it's not going to be like triple important.
Yeah, the winner, as we've talked about in the way NPI works, the winner will have an advantage over the loser,
Yes.
right? So that head-to-head does matter. It just, yeah, could feel different sometimes in the old system. All right, let's move on. Next slide here. November 19, Gettysburg takes on Montclair State.
Yeah, I think we've talked about Gettysburg a little bit. New coach, Coach BJ Dunn moving on to MIT. Montclair State, they've been in the top 25 for the preseason poll. I didn't put them on my ballot. They were a little bit of a wait and see for me. I'd be happy to be proven wrong in a game like this, though. They can get a big win against Gettysburg. That would go a long way towards me being comfortable. Oh, yeah, they were a tournament team last year. They should be top 25 again. So I'm looking for those types of wins. But I'll admit, they were just on my watch list as I put together my top 25.
All right, we got 3 here with some Northwest Conference teams making some trips. We got Whitworth taking on Gustavus Adolphus to start.
Whitworth at 22-4, kind of surprising, but missed the NCAA tournament last year. Maybe just didn't have enough quality in their schedule. So they go on and play. You can see the two games in on there. I'll just kind of take them together a little bit, but they're playing Gustavus and St. John's out in Minnesota. Those are the two teams that were the top of the MIAC last year. Both, though, I think are replacing a lot, so it's hard to see. I think Whitworth's going out and trying to play these other top teams from other top conferences. They need to travel to get their non-conference games and being kind of in the island in that Pacific Northwest. But really interesting to see what they can build toward this next season. That Whitworth and Gustavus, though, two teams that are going to maybe spend or maybe did spend the offseason kind of ruining the final last 2 weeks of the season. Whitworth lost a game to Whitman, then lost I think tournament final to Lewis and Clark, and that kept them out of the tournament. Gustavus Adolphus lost back-to-back games to Carleton, and that put the first team out of the tournament. So I think redemption for both these teams starts with this game, big one, as both are trying to claim those big wins to get their programs back into that position this year.
Whitman is that other Northwest Conference team taking a trip. They'll be in Thousand Oaks to take on Cal Lutheran November 21.
Yeah, and we get a lot of these Region 10 cross conference matchups by necessity. They both need non-conference games. They both can't really bust to other Division III teams that are outside of their conference. We get a lot of them, and they're big. They're big games for the specific teams. Like Whitman's a program that we know is always in the mix in the Northwest Conference and has been in national tournaments. Cal Lutheran, the same thing in Southern California in the SCIAC. But they're also big for their leagues. We know there's always kind of this battle for who can host maybe a potential Region 10 type pod. If your conference can get big NPI wins in the non-conference, then that helps whoever maybe ends up winning that conference be in the best NPI position, maybe be in one of those top 16 spots. And you'd love to host a tournament pod in Southern California or in the Northwest Corridor or somewhere like that. And for not just these two teams, but for their conferences as a whole, these kind of games are big for that.
Whitworth wraps up their Minnesota trip taking on St. John's. Matt, you kind of already mentioned that. Anything else you want to say? I think interesting dynamics just with where Whitworth, Gustavus, and St. John's was in the tournament field, but given where they all finished in proximity to each other a year ago, it can be interesting to see how Whitworth comes out of that weekend.
Yeah, I mean, just first and foremost, you look at this game as like two programs, regardless of what you know about their rosters, that you're going to be interested in, and you are pretty confident will find themselves, both fairly good. We don't know if it's going to be top 25 good or top 50 good, but probably somewhere in that range. That's where we've seen these teams almost every year for like a decade or so, right? So you don't know exactly what the iteration is. You love the programs, you love to watch the programs, and you figure someone's going to find something great. Whitworth's out here again trying to get these other good games. St. John's is trying to reload. I think I'm kind of sick of it. We're going to talk about St. John's and the unknown aspect of the roster until probably the new year. At some point, we'll know the roster and we'll know like maybe they are just great again. There's every chance that that's the case. But again, just two great programs. You love to see this game happening in November.
Yeah, everyone's got roster turnover, but it's an unusual amount of turnover for that St. John's squad from a year ago. Okay, let's move on. November 21 is the first day of the Great Lakes Invitational that will be hosted at Washington and Jefferson this year. One of those headlining games. I mean, you could throw all 8 games in any GLI, on a list like this. We were a little bit more reserved, Matt, but one we got to talk about here. Carthage will play Maryville.
Yeah, I think a massive uptick in expectations compared to last year for both of these teams. For me, Carthage could be one of those prime contenders for like a top 8 overall seed, be one of those teams that maybe hosts all the way to Fort Wayne if they're fortunate enough to get in and win those games. Maryville, we've already talked about their good non-conference schedule, their kind of top 21 preseason ranking. It's one of those games that you kind of hate to see someone going to have to lose. I know Maryville has had previous experiences in the Great Lakes Invitational where they also played 2 other really great teams and came out of the weekend, I think maybe 0-2. Hopefully they can avoid that this year. But this is just a fantastic game for Division III fans. Zach, one that we're glad that we're going to see this tournament weekend, this GLI weekend up close and personal as we're there. But I would love to see Carthage. I would love to see Maryville in person. That's going to be just a fantastic game.
Yep. 2 more teams we'll see in person that day. Mary Washington takes on Trine. Coaching changes has been one of our themes today. Trine is in that spot with, Brooks Miller left Trine to take a assistant job at Central Michigan. John Vanderwall leaves Marietta to take the Trine job. Another one of those, dominoes falling. Andy Buhai leaves Heidelberg to then take the Marietta job. Anyway, all that to say, we'll get our get an up close and personal look at trying under the direction of John Vanderwall. And Matt, leading up to this episode, as we were putting it together, we maybe made a mistake, or we wondered if we made a mistake in not including the matchup between Marietta and Trine at the Great Lakes Invitational. So let's just add that into the mix for discussion purposes. A little bonus 51st game maybe we can talk about.
Yeah, the bonus game Marietta Trine, like John Vanderwall knew he was going to be coaching in that game. He just maybe initially thought it was going to be on the Marietta side. Now he's going to be on the Trine side. So just fascinating to see a coaching change like that, where now you're coaching your former team just like a week or two into the season. That's going to have to be kind of almost surreal, almost out of body for him. I think he's going to have the Trine program in the right direction in pretty short order. So what we're gonna have to see for the GLI is that now, or is that like down the road now? And then for Mary Washington, like my question for them is, are they really as good as they looked down the stretch last year? Was it like a hot 2 or 3 weeks, which we know teams have, or was it really it's a young roster who's now putting it together, who's now gaining momentum and finding the success that they deserve, and now in the next year with everyone a year older, are they going to continue that trajectory? I think it's the latter. I think they're continuing that trajectory, but it's a game against another good program. We've seen Trine, right, cutting down the nets in Fort Wayne just a couple seasons ago, so that's a good program, good team. How does Mary Washington stack up this year in the early season against a team like Trine, and vice versa, right? How does Trine stack up with a new coach against a program like Mary Washington, who has all those preseason expectations?
There's a couple on day one of the Great Lakes Invitational. Let's talk about the Keene State Invitational, where St. Joseph's Maine, a program we've already talked about, will take on WPI, another program we've already talked about, in
Yes,
another matchup that we've already talked about between the GNAC and the NUMAC.
every top GNAC is playing every top NUMAC, and to me, they're all very, very interesting. I'm very interested in St. Joseph's Maine and WPI, two teams I have in my top 25. I think this is just another iteration. I don't mean to give this individual matchup a short change, but it's another iteration, I think, of what we've talked about 3 or 4 times. Games that are big for both of these programs, and I think it's really interesting because this is for me, right, like a tournament type matchup that we're going to see, and at a place like Keene State, that's really fun to get that neutral court game in November, a potential March preview in my mind.
Day two of the GLI, Carthage will take on Mary Washington.
Speaking of previews, I think we both got a maybe one season too early preview for both of these teams last year. Carthage showed that by actually going out and winning the CCIW. That's a tough league year in and year out. Then they got into the tournament last year as a Pool C. Mary Washington was below 500 going into kind of those final championship weekend. They win the Coast to Coast Conference tournament. Then they get into the national tournament and get to the Sweet 16. That's that young program that was maybe finally clicking all together. So both these programs return a ton of talent. I think they're all back, and now they have huge expectations. Carthage, for me, kind of a top 10-ish team. Mary Washington, really close to that, maybe just outside of that, top 12, top 16 type team for me. Really good game, really great neutral site type game that you love to see. This is like, if I told you now, Zach, hey, we're going to see Carthage and Mary Washington play again later in the season, you're like, oh, that's a game that's going to happen in Fort Wayne. And like no one would be super surprised if that happened. Now we have to see if everything comes together for these two teams, but that's the type of expectations I think you and I and a lot of people around the country have for Carthage and Mary Washington right now.
Yeah, unfortunately, there's the geographic component that makes that a given that would probably be something like an Elite Eight game, but I think you're right. All right, let's talk about Emory and Guilford. We mentioned Emory a little bit. I believe Ben Pierce and Jair Knight have the chance to finish their careers as the number 1 and number 2 scorers in Emory history. Matt Guilford is another program going through a coaching change. Jesse DeLoof takes over at Guilford, after a successful run there at Pitt Bradford. And boy, that's going to be a big stylistic change for Guilford. From what they, have traditionally been one of the slower tempo teams, and
Yeah.
those Pitt Bradford teams over the last couple of years have been, among the pace leaders. I assume they're going to be playing fast, but that's going to be an adjustment. It'll be interesting to see how quickly, the returning personnel does adjust to that style change.
Yeah, and I'm interested in Guilford early on in the year just for that fact, just to see how are they going to play this year, what's their personnel going to be like, what's their style going to be like. That's still a program. I know it's a different program, right? Tom Palumbo's gone. He took a D1 associate head coaching role. But they were a program that was just in the Final Four a couple of years ago. Emory was right on the doorstep of a Final Four last year. They had an overtime chance against Wesleyan that they just lost that overtime game in the Elite Eight. That's heartbreaking. So two programs that have been, basically to the upper echelons of Division Three the last couple of seasons. You're right, Guilford's going to look a little bit different, but again, Guilford Emery, like I will sign up for that type of game, all day long.
Let's take these next two together. This will be at the Governor's Challenge at Salisbury. Roanoke will take on Wesleyan, and then Wesleyan comes back the next day with another good game, taking on Gettysburg.
Yeah, right. Wesleyan was every bit the national contender last year. I think they were number one for the most weeks into the season. They were in the Final Four, and they only lost to their conference mate, Trinity, Connecticut, I think, who had also beaten them maybe in the conference tournament final if that was the matchup. But like really their only losses all season long was at Trinity, Connecticut, who are the national champions. They do have to replace some big names at the top. I think in particular Shane Regan, who we talked about as a grad transfer to U Chicago, is gone. They're going to have to replace that scoring production. So what is Wesleyan a little bit after being so great last year? I think that they can reload, but what exactly does that look like? I don't know. Roanoke is a team that's getting a ton of love in the preseason top 25 by voters, but we know not only in their non-conference schedule, but their conference schedule, they have a gauntlet to run in the ODAC. That's always a deep, tough league. I think we've already talked about teams like Randolph-Macon in the ODAC and Virginia Wesleyan and Roanoke and Hampton-Sydney. Like you can be a really, really good team and be fourth or fifth in that league. So what's Roanoke going to be able to put together? Fascinated to see that matchup from this standpoint. And then we've talked some about Gettysburg, coaching change there. There was a program that did get into the national tournament last year. How do they stack up against a NESCAC like Wesleyan? How does Wesleyan stack up against Centennial Conference like Gettysburg? I think this is a really fascinating matchup, measuring stick type game for both programs to see where they are at this point, kind of as we get into late November maybe in the season.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it will be interesting to see how much of a reload it is or needs to be for Wesleyan because being in the NESCAC that can be an unforgiving place to need to reload. So interested to see how they look this season. All right, that wraps up the second full week. Let's go on to the third full week of November. The third full week of the season in November. This is a little bit of a lighter week because this does include Thanksgiving. So just a little bit of a break in there, fewer games scheduled. But Wabash will travel to St. Louis to take on Wash U November 24.
Yeah, you and I hate Thanksgiving because we hate a lighter week in Division III basketball schedules. But starting off with Wabash Wash U, that's a really good game. Two programs we've seen in the Final Four in the last maybe 4 years or so. Whenever Wabash was in that, I think it was 4 or 5 years, probably only 4 years ago. Wash U was just in the Final Four this last year. There's been a lot of chatter on the internets about Wash U losing their two best players and yet still getting a top 5 preseason position. Zach, it's my understanding, and I think yours as well, that they still have a lot on that roster. Even though Hayden Doyle's gone and Drake Kynes-Vader is gone, like there's still a bunch of good players at Wash U. It's still a really good program. What are they gonna have ready to go this season? A game against a NCAC contender like Wabash. I think that's a great game to start, a game to see. And I'm interested to see what Wash U brings to the table in November. This is maybe one of their tougher games in November. And again, for all those reasons, really interested in it.
Another team I'm really looking forward to seeing this year, Matt, is Hardin Simmons after the kind of the run they put together to close last year.
Yeah.
Maybe a headlining game for them early in the season when they take on St. Thomas November 25.
Yep. Yeah, for Hardin Simmons, they were the number one team in the coaches poll for the ASC. ASC is down to only 4 teams, though, so you're like, well, what does that even mean? But the top 25 voters have them in at number 20 nationally. So a lot of national love for Hardin Simmons. You mentioned that great run they had to end the year. St. Thomas is also getting national love. They weren't in the top 25, but they received a lot of votes and kind of are one of those teams maybe in that next tier, just outside of the top 25. So always interesting when these kind of Texas schools from different conferences match up, especially two that you figure to feature prominently in their conference races. That means like potential tournament matchups and hosting type considerations and the like. But two good teams, again, not just in their region, but also nationally.
All right, Trine travels to Anderson November 26. We talked about Anderson at the top of this episode and that rematch with Hope and what that game last year kind of taught us about Anderson. This is another rematch from a game a year ago. Trine did win that game, but I believe they were ranked number 1 at the time, and you looked at how competitive it was. Another game that kind of raised an eyebrow, just with Anderson hanging with the number 1 ranked team at the time.
Yeah, a game that even in a loss kind of positively impacted our impression of what Anderson was, but also maybe ended up being a game at the end of the year that could have kept them out of the NCAA tournament. They were a bubble team again that kind of fell off of that. And if they could have won this game, they lost by 5. Maybe they would have been in the tournament. So starting out in November, we mentioned they're a game with hope. Here's another strong MIAA, traditional MIAA power now. Anderson has the opportunity against 2 of them, and that'd be a really big one for them to win and then take into HCAC play later in the year.
NYU makes a California trip, which, if I'm remembering correctly, they did as well a couple years ago. I seem to be remembering a big time NYU Redlands game a couple years ago. They take on Cal Lutheran November 26th.
Yeah, I recall that as well. They played Caltech and Redlands. To me, NYU looked very pedestrian in that trip out west. That Caltech game was single digits. I think the final margin was 9, but it was like single digits all the way. That was not a good Caltech team. And then the Redlands game, maybe in hindsight now at what Redlands was building toward, was more fine than it felt at the time. I think we had. Oh, was that the same year we saw Redlands in the Great Lakes Invitational, or was it a year
I think
plus or minus that? It was.
no, I think it was the same year. Yeah.
So we knew that was a good team. NYU then went on to finish the year 21-6 and was in the NCAA tournament. They were just fine. I think going all the way from East Coast to West Coast, maybe just travel is difficult. So it'll be interesting though to see 2 really strong programs now for years, NYU and Cal Lutheran. Cal Lutheran's been good. That Cal Lutheran does have to replace a ton of talent that they lost from last year. So we'll see if they can stay in the mix in the SCIAC. But maybe 2 teams that are trying to find in the early season what exactly they are for this 25-26 year.
Let's move on to a big one in Ohio, Matt. Worcester and Mount Union. They're not in the same conference, but being in both in Ohio, it just feels like 2 programs that should play every year. And they both even play in Timken Gymnasium.
Yeah, different Timken gymnasiums, but the same name nonetheless. Yeah, 2 big names in Ohio, traditional powers, NCAC for Worcester, OAC for Mount Union. They can get together now and talk about maybe how they both don't like John Carroll anymore, as John Carroll has moved from the OAC to the NCAC for this year. But yeah, just really good. I like to kind of think about these 2 conferences in conjunction with each other just because they're so mixed up geographically. So it's nice to see, like, okay, is Worcester one of the top teams in the NCAC? Is Mount Union the OAC? Like, how do those 2 leagues compare against each other? This type of game, I think, is great for that as you kind of mentally stack up the leagues against each other.
And another one that'll be interesting for maybe even just how these programs stack up with each other. That's Oshkosh, who we've talked about a few times, and Augustana.
Yeah, I think they both have a chance to get back into the mix in the upper echelon of their leagues. I think I've talked about that for each of their games that have been on this list so far. And one of those really big NPI games for their respective conferences, right? Even if it's not UW Oshkosh and Augustana, it could be Carthage and La Crosse. You hoping to be maybe a top 4 overall seed or one of those top 8 protected seeds or something like that. And it's actually games like this with your conference mates that can help swing the balance, because if Augustana can pull those NPI points away from UW Oshkosh, and if Carthage could beat Augustana, then that helps their position. I know I've talked about that a lot today, but it is games like this that do matter a lot if you're a fan of the CCIW or a fan of the WIAC. So it has ramifications beyond just how are Oshkosh and Augustana this year. I think both pretty good. They're both kind of on my maybe next chunk of teams to watch outside of my top 25 and watch list. I think both pretty good. So it's entertaining on its own right, but then also just that power dynamic between the WIAC, between the CCIW, when they're battling for geography and tournament seeding and everything like that. It could be a game like this that you point to that says, well, the winner of this game tips the scale in the favor of their conference.
That kicks off a string of games here on the last day of November. Also on November 30, Hamilton will play at Franklin and Marshall.
Yeah, I think we've talked about both of these teams a little bit. Franklin and Marshall won the Centennial last year. The Centennial is a team that had like 3 or 4 teams, like the last couple of years has had a bunch of teams right in the mix at the top. Franklin and Marshall has been there as well as anyone. Hamilton and the NESCAC, we know that's another team that top to bottom really has a bunch of quality. So these 2 teams are not strangers to playing these types of games, but in the non-conference just makes it a little bit more fun because you don't get to see them play each other all that often, right? So Hamilton and Franklin and Marshall, 2 teams, where can they stack up in their own conferences? Can they both make runs at being kind of one of those 2 or 3 teams in the mix again? We talked about the Hank Morgan factor of Hamilton not having him this year, trying to reload. So to me, they're the bigger question mark of these 2. I think I'm more confident with what Franklin and Marshall has going forward as a direct contender in the Centennial.
2 more to wrap up. Tufts plays at Keene State. The Keene State's had some unbelievable games, some unbelievable atmospheres hosting NESCAC teams. I expect probably as November finishes here, they'll have the same thing as Tufts comes to town.
I haven't looked back to see how often these two teams have played in the non-conference, but for me, at least the last several years that we've been doing this show, it feels like it's every single year. And I just get visions of watching the live stream at a packed out Keene State. They pack out the gym and like everyone's in white, and just it's one of the best Division III atmospheres I can think of. And with Tufts coming into the season with such high expectations, they look like one of the best teams in the country, even if they look like the second best team in the NESCAC, because I think that's going to be a crazy good top of the league again this year. But it's games like this. And Keene State is one of those places that you said can bring that atmosphere that makes it feel like whatever you want to call it, like a Division One type of a game. When you watch that live stream and they've packed out that gym, see if they can do it again this year. That's just fantastic to watch, like that in its own regard, much less like these two teams being big names in Division Three and in the Northeast corridor. That just like atmosphere that it brings is fantastic in its own right.
Yeah, fun when that energy can come through when you're watching on stream. All right, one more here. A couple teams we've talked about, but a big matchup in Texas nonetheless. Hardin Simmons will play Trinity.
Yeah, and we've talked about these two teams and Hardin Simmons getting the top 25 love and the expectations. Trinity having the changeover with a new coach and Christian Green transferring away as well. So what do they have? But another interesting dynamic here between these two teams, and then let's also just throw in like a St. Thomas or whoever in the mix. Those three Texas teams. Well, there's now like the ASC, which is a traditional Texas kind of conference, the SCAC, which is essentially a traditional Texas conference as well. Now Trinity, Texas goes to the SAA. That's going to be an interesting dynamic with three different conferences involved. Because when you talk about like Texas pods and hosting and where can teams go and play, that having three different conferences does maybe affect what the committee can do with geography, right? And trying to prevent same conferences from playing in early rounds. So again, as we look just for a November game, all games count the same. And as we look forward to March, what could a potential tournament bracket look like for two teams that have had a history of success and expectations of success? Like, can be a really big impact just on how the bracket is constructed as well. So interested in this game because Hardin Simmons and Trinity is like always like a sign me up for it type of a game, but just also for me as like a bracketology person, thinking of what the ramifications are now with like three leagues in the mix. That's interesting as well.
And we talked about the Trinity game against Emory earlier in the show. And, under the old system, we would have talked about that being a new important Region 6 matchup because with
Yeah.
Trinity moving to the SAA, that's a Region 6
Yeah.
conference. So they not only change conferences, but they change from Region 10 to Region
Yeah.
6. But, that's just a dynamic we thankfully don't really have to worry about so much about anymore. But interesting little subtext there.
Yeah. I am glad really that the last vestiges of regionality have kind of completely gone away in Division Three. I know teams by default are going to have to play teams that are regionally proximate to them, but really we're just nationally perspective now. And I think that's actually a really good thing because that's how the D3 bracket is constructed. I think that's what you and I are interested in is not just like what is the regionality, but like how do things connect across the country. So I am glad that we don't have that Trinity going from Region 10 to Region 6, just changing that number, that's not actually like a big deal for anything.
Agree. All right, so that got us excited for the season. Hopefully, I'm guessing if you're watching the show, you were already excited for the season, but hopefully you're even more excited now as we have games to look forward to. It's going to be great, and it's good. It's great to have a group of supporters who have come alongside us and support us along the way. It's going to be a lot of fun. Happy to have these people listed on screen along for the ride, supporting us through Patreon at patreon.com/D3Datacast.
Yeah, if you'd like to join them, go to that URL that Zach just mentioned. There's a $3 a tier month, a $5 a month tier. So pick whichever one you'd like. We just love so much that you enjoy these episodes, you watch these episodes. If you want to comment below, say again what we missed. It's just been so fun to have everyone along for the ride. So thanks to our Patreon supporters who help us to produce these shows, who help us to put data on d3datacast.com and keep that ad free. We thank you so much. And also enjoy your early access that you get. But Zach, that was a lot of games. This is going to be like an hour episode. So we're going to have to get out of here for now. And until next time, we're going to say, good job, team.